architectural work. Then we always have challenges when we work. The regulation keeps changing around us all the time, and we have to adjust to it. Project complexity is another challenge. They get to be more and more complex with time, and sometimes with size, sometimes they're complex even when they're small. So when I think back about how my own work on projects has changed over 20 or 30 years, it's a lot more complex. I have to think about a lot more now than I used to. The team size figures into it. The larger the team, the more planning and coordination is required. And then there's always the issue of project delivery, because that could also complicate things, especially with fast tracking. Sometimes projects start construction before design is done, and sometimes projects are phased, and things that used to be new work in a previous phase now are existing conditions. And the work is cyclical. Each project has a life cycle of its own, so decisions that are made early in the project are different from decisions that are made later on. And then there's a technological arms race. The more capable the hardware and the more sophisticated the software, the more demanding the uses become in the again, in the ecosystem of the project work. Every year there's a new Vectorworks release, and that's a cyclical event that we should and we do plan for. And then every office, every organization has its own culture. So all of these these are things that I've been thinking about for a long time. So when I first saw a computer workstation, it looked like this. It was the 1980s. It was huge. It was expensive. And in fact, it wasn't even a computer. It was just a terminal. The computer itself sat on the other side of campus, and being that I went to school in Texas, the other side of campus was really far away. And this was super expensive. You have to sign up. There were only 2 of these for the entire School of Architecture. You had to sign up for time, but luckily very few students at the time took it. So I lucked out sometimes and I could get sign up. And back then, I thought of technology in architecture as a way to delegate the manual labor of drafting, essentially roboticize the drafting. It offered some reliability, some speed, and some scalability, but it was very, very primitive at the time. And I think from the very beginning, there was the issue of 3-dimensional visualization in the background. It was clear to everyone who looked at computer technology that it was going to happen. It was happening. It was still primitive at the time, but it was coming. So in our work, in our office, and we have a very small office, we have 2 users, and we try to be as smart and as efficient with our work as possible. Our goals are to produce documents that have clarity, precision, and consistency, so that they communicate clearly our work. We started relatively, in the last 3 years or so, incorporating 3D views of the pieces of the project, and we've noticed that particularly with builders, yes, they want to know what the dimensions are. They want to see the plan and the section and everything. But when they really want to understand our intent, they look at the three-dimensional view. So we started incorporating them more and more, and I don't see an end to that. We want to visualize the design for ourselves so that we understand what we're talking about. And then the speed and ease of revisions and replication is an obvious advantage of this technology, as well as kind of perpetuating the knowledge and retaining the data and carrying it over from from project to project. It's inventing the wheel the second time around is not as much fun as the first time. And there's the obvious advantage of coordination, both internally with between our own documents and then with outside consultants. And we, like I said, we want to be smart. We don't want to waste time or energy. So we want to optimize our own resources as we work. And like I said, the complexity is growing. We don't see that it's slowing down or it's going to stop or it's going to come to some kind of plateau. We just need to be ready for it. Now, I don't know whether it happened to you, but it happened to me on a number of occasions where I opened the file that could be from another consultant or the client or some third party, and looking at it, it's like a bowl of spaghetti. It's a bunch of lines, frequently all the same color, all on the same class or layer, as other packages call it, and I couldn't make sense of it, and that really saps a lot of energy. Instead of actually doing the work, I'm trying to figure out what it is that I'm looking at. Now, that intergraph station that I showed you earlier had some classes built into it, or layers, I'm sorry, they called it layers. You could have 64 layers, and who would ever need more than 64 layers? Now, there was this minor thing that you couldn't name them. They were numbered. I think it was 0 through 63. But then how difficult would it be to remember what you put on layer 23 or layer 55? Later on, other packages and also packages that were developed by Intergraph improved the capability of layers, classes. But in the beginning, there were really no standards for it. And then in 1990, the AIA published the first set of CAD layer guidelines. It was pretty crude, it was primitive, but it was there. It was valuable in what it did. And it's, again, like I said, the approach to CAD was that it was some kind of mechanized drafting. So it perpetuated the way the thinking of the production of architectural documents was. So they broke it into A for architectural, S for structural, C for civil, and so on. But it was pretty limited. In 1997, they updated it, and then later on, this whole thing morphed into the National CAD Standards, NCS. So the AIA in the early 90s realized that having an approach and attitude towards layers, the use of layers in architectural work, in CAD work, was important. But the adoption was slow and uneven. I actually remember there was an office that I worked in the mid-90s in Boston, where that had no standards, and essentially every user decided for themselves how they do that. And again, the attitude was the CAD file is an equivalent to the sheet of Mylar, and everyone can decide whether they use a pencil or an ink pen to draw on it, whatever. And at some point, I was asked, I was a lot younger and inexperienced, and I was asked to develop standards for layers for the office, and I discovered that the Aia Cad Guidelines existed, and I just told the principals that we shouldn't spend energy reinventing something that someone already thought about, but still getting that to be adopted office-wide, and that wasn't a very large office, it was probably a 15-person office. It took time. So how did we start with it? And that was years ago. When we start a new file, a new project, and we start working on it, we refer back to an old project and we just cannibalize pieces from it, symbols, line types, whatever details. And then we cannibalize pieces from another project, and this way that was the basic approach to recycling knowledge, recycling things that we've already knew how to do. And it can make sense, except that each one of these projects was done in a different version of Vectorworks. So, the level of sophistication, the use of the technology was uneven. So if you go back to a 10-year-old project and you get things out of it, you may be dragging with you all kinds of unwanted legacy. Additionally, there's another little thing, is that our mastery of the technology evolves with time. So the things that we knew when we did the earlier projects may not be the most state of the art. So, okay, we know that layers or classes are important, and we don't want to spend time trying to figure out where to put things when we work on a project, because we draw a line, we need to decide where it's going. Creating a template gives you a framework with all the places to put stuff in it. So first, where are the templates? If you go to Vectorworks preferences and you look at the user folders and you reveal them in Finder, it will tell you where they are. On the Mac, it's in the Macintosh library, which is kind of hidden by the operating system, so you kind of need to know the secret how to get to it. But if you go through it, you get straight there, and then you see that under the Vectorworks folder, there's a folder for each release of Vectorworks, and then there are libraries, and under defaults there are the templates, and under the templates you have some folders for various templates. And we essentially everything that we modify that is our own, we put the letters NKD to it so that we know that it's ours, and that's where we find it. In the earlier phase, I thought that it might make sense to have more than one template, because occasionally we did a project in metric units, or sometimes the project has different drawing sizes. Very quickly, I learned by hard knocks that the maintenance of multiple templates is very time consuming. It's not worth it. It's a lot easier to just work with one template and modify it on an as needed basis. So when we start a new document in Vectorworks, we get this window, and it always defaults to the last template used. So it will always default to this one template that we're using, and the template requires regular maintenance. It's not one and done. Using the template reduces a project file setup time. And it provides some framework for efficient deployment of the work. So again, if I have to make a decision under a crushing deadline, chances are the decision is going to be less than optimal. So having that in place helps me keep my sanity. So what do we put in the templates? We started with the classes because, like I said, that was the first and most obvious element of organization that needed to be established. But then we have line types that we use, and we want them to be consistent. Then there are design layers, and back before Vectorworks used stories, we actually predefined design layers for the different floors of the project. Now, there's a limit to how much work we want to do on the template. So we started with three levels plus a basement, and then we thought that we could replicate it if we went any higher. The sheet layers in the title block is something that we really we thought was valuable. Again, that's before Vectorworks introduced styles for those, but we still have them. It also helps us with establishing the sheet numbering system. So we don't have to go back and see, where does the wall section fall? What number it's on? We have one that says that it's wall section on it. Predefined viewports. That's helpful. So when we start drawing the plans, we have the floor plans already start showing at the right scale on the sheet layer. There are frequently used symbols, but I will, in a little while, I'll talk about those library files, because there's been an explosion of the number of symbols that we use, and it can get out of control really quickly. Hatches, again, graphic consistency. Gradients, that's something that we use because sometimes we have some planning, or we work with multifamily developers that want to know was unit 1, unit 2, unit 3. So we just develop a library of gradients so that we can use them. We don't have to stop and redefine them every time. Record formats, that's its own topic, and probably cover it up separately. Worksheets, reports, and schedules. Custom markers. When we put a call out, we have a custom marker for it. It's not one of the things that comes straight out of the box with Vectorworks, and the template is a natural place. We only have one of those, but it's there. The object styles, we'll talk about those. Renderworks styles, that's a, I don't remember when they introduced this, but for people who do renderings, this is pretty handy and saves time. And now with, I think it's the latest 2021, they introduce materials. The template or the libraries are a good place for them. So our workflow now is that we still have those old projects that we worked on 10 or maybe even 15 years ago. But instead of cannibalizing them directly into the new project, when we see something in each of the old projects that we think is worth preserving and using in the future, we just drag it into a library file. And then from the library file, we bring it into the new project. What that does, it gives us a centralized location in a library file where if changes need to be made, if a new release of Vectorworks introduces a new capability that's useful for any of these particular resources, we just update it there, and it's only one location that we have to go to. Now, Vectorworks itself builds suggested workflows into product updates, and those change. I remember they used to have those default layers that were called mod-something. Maybe some of you remember. Mm-hmm. They've abandoned those, and they have new ways of doing it with the stories. They streamlined the creation of design layers. So we actually remove design layers from a template, and we just have default layers for stories that enables us to generate those layers quickly on an as-needed basis. And we found out that sometimes the template gets very bloated, and just when we start a new file, even before we drop the first line in it, it's already 40 megs in size. So we try to get that under control to the extent that we can. The resource browser matured into the resource manager, and it has more and more capabilities with each release, and we use it more and more. And then the workflow itself evolves with everything that is happening around it. So it's the case of, you change the world and you get changed by the world, right? And the new technological capabilities. And we try to have our internal users feedback loop. So when we realize that something that we built in is no longer useful or never was really useful, we try to go back and update it and streamline, remove, reintroduce. And if we need to, we actually call Vectorworks and we ask them for feature requests. I think we did it last week. Styles. The introduction of styles by Vectorworks started, I don't remember when, and I don't remember what was, where was it first introduced. I think it was walls, slabs, and roofs, and probably sketch styles too. I think those were the first that were introduced, and they've expanded it to doors and windows, text styles, now the sheet borders, they changed them. I think it was in 2019 or 2020 that the sheet border is completely different animal now. Renderworks styles, we do some renderings, and that is helpful to have. And then in the latest update to Vectorworks, they introduced gridline styles, drawing label styles, section elevation line styles, detail callout styles, and maybe some other styles that we haven't run into. Some of these new introductions were not as loudly publicized as other features, so we kind of found them and were pleasantly surprised. But we're using them, and we find them to be very, very powerful. Some other entities have style too. I think columns have styles, but they don't have all the controllability of other styles. So we can talk about that in a little while. But by using styles, what we found is that we actually alleviated some of the bloating of the template, because we actually don't have to create all the classes in the template. Now, since our template already has many classes, we haven't gone in and cleaned it up. But one thing that Vectorworks again introduced in the way they deployed the styles were classes start with the word component, and it makes a lot of sense, because when you draw a wall, especially an exterior wall, it has components that have to do with different divisions of CSI. So the siding and the weather barrier are in division 7, and the framing is in division 6, and the insulation is in division 7, but the interior finish is in division 9. And by the old clunky CAD layer guidelines, everything would fall under a wall. And here with the component classes, it suddenly opened our eyes, and we said it makes a lot of sense. We can multiply those component classes and then control their graphic attributes by class, and we can do that differently for different viewports at different scales, and this is very powerful. And we actually expanded that. So now we, in our template, we have components, and we kind of cascade them by CSI divisions, and it keeps, that part of the template keeps growing all the time, because we run into situations where we need more and more of these. So on the collaboration and exchange front, there's an import, there's an export, and there's round tripping. We don't do a whole lot of really any of these. We do some import and some export, we have to, but very little round tripping. So I'm not going to talk much about this. I know that Vectorworks has suggested workflows that have to do with shuttle files, and I don't know, whether you use that, Brian, in your work, but we just don't have the occasion to do that a lot. So when we import into Vectorworks, it's under the file menu, under the import, you can import a single DXF or DWG, which is what we really have been doing the most. You can import more than one. the except for DWG. You can import IFC, we'll talk about it a little bit, and you can import Revit or batch import Revit. I haven't batch imported Revit. My experience with importing Revit has been somewhat painful and uneven. It works, but not always. Sometimes we find ourselves doing it for downloaded resources from the web for various building organs, right? All kinds of building systems and entities. But importing entire projects can be pretty touchy. Another import that we used to do a lot, a little less now, is import from Sketchup. So this is an import from Revit we did a year or two ago from a colleague that we collaborate with. He sent us on the same day the same file as Revit and as IFC, and these are the images of the import from the Revit and the IFC into Vectorworks. You can see that they look a little different, but for example, at the very top, you see that the top floor walls poke above the roof in Revit, but IFC is smart enough to know that the walls stop at the roof. I can tell you that the IFC input was a lot smoother, took a lot less time. Revit was a lot of trial and error. When you the IFC input is, like I said, more stable, and it has more options, and it has the advantage of being imported as a reference. So this is one way of looking at what's available for import in IFC. IFC, I believe, stands for Industry Foundation Classes. It's an exchange format for BIM. I don't know a whole lot about it, other than that it works. And when I tried to talk to Vectorworks tech support about extracting IFC data for scheduling purposes, they essentially dissuaded me from doing that. They said, no, that's not how you do it. So it has a limited functionality, but within that limited functionality, it works well. And as you can see here, you can selectively import stories of a project by checking or unchecking on the left. You can expand those stories, and then you can increase the granularity of what you import into building elements for each story, or you can import them by building elements. So I don't know if you have I can't think of anything, but you can import slabs only and nothing else, or spaces only and nothing else. The Revit input, like I said, is buggy, and it sometimes causes at least my Vectorworks to hang. It has very few options, and here they are. You can import the active view only. That requires you to know what the active view is. Or you can import the three-dimensional geometry of the model, or both the 2D and 3D. I have not been successful importing 2D and 3D views. When we import symbols and blocks that are downloaded from the web, they don't really have 2D views, so they work fine. And then you have some options about what kind of Vectorworks objects are created from this import. I found that the solid objects work more reliably than other options, and that meshes are just very difficult to work with. In terms of exporting, you can export any of these formats too, and now I know that exporting DWG, it's a very diverse world out there. So I send a DWG file to a consultant and I get the email back saying, can you save it down to 2014, or can you save it down to another version, or AutoCAD Lite or whatever. So there's a way to save export settings for each consultant if you need to. Okay, that's about that for here. I'm going to open a file that we're working on now, just to talk about the styles and how we use them, because I think it's a fairly powerful feature, and the advantage is that we see of it is that if a style is defined as having a certain class, and that class is defined as having some attributes like line type, line thickness, line fill and texture, or even material. I don't know about material. Then if you import it from the library file, it brings all this baggage with it. So you don't need to have the classes defined in your template, where you can just rely on the library files for it. First, I'm going to show how we start a new file. So when I click file new, this is what I get. I can change which template I get here, but this is 98% of the time that's what we use. We started from here, and it opens on the cover sheet. It has this cover sheet information, and I need to move this here, and we have a number of drawing sheets defined here based on the sheet numbering system that we use, and we only have two design layers when we start it up. One is a site, and the other one is the grid. And on the grid, we have the new gridline objects. They're, I don't know how many of you are using these, but they're pretty cool right now because they're three-dimensional grids. So they show up in section viewports as well as top plan view, and it contributes a lot to my sanity. If we here we need to create new design layers, we can do it through the stories. We have a number of stories predefined, but they don't have design layers associated with them. So for example, I know I'm going to have a basement, and if I click edit, we have an existing to remain, new work, and demo layer, and just put a check next to each one and say okay, and here they've been created here automatically. Same thing we do for every other layer. The the grid lines have a style. So we can edit that style here. Now, again, Shelley, Brian, I don't know whether we've covered styles in the past, but I'm assuming that we're all familiar with these two icons. It's either this or this, right? You see what I'm doing? Like this with that little curved arrow says that this particular aspect of the style is controlled by style, or if I change it to those sliders, it can be individually controlled for each entity. So we predefined a style for a grid line that has our letters, the NKD here, and this is how we use them. This enables us to use different typefaces for different styles, because now we used to try to be consistent with the typefaces and everything was the same typeface, and now we realize that actually it may make sense to make the grid line either number or letter a little different so that it stands out on the drawing sheet, and we control it by style. Same thing we do with the drawing label style. So those styles are defined in our template. So I'm going to go back and open a file of a project that's in progress. It's a project that we're working on right now. And it has a number of different styles assigned to it. And if I go to I go to one of the if I pick a wall, this is an exterior wall. Actually, this is not an exterior wall. I have an exterior wall. I have an exterior wall here, and it has a style right here. And if I go to edit that style, I can see that it has a number of components. It has a fiber cement siding. It has sheathing. It has the framing, and it has the chipboard. And each one is assigned to a class. So if I, for example, look at the sheathing and I go to the class, it's assigned to component division 6 sheathing. And in this case, it also has a material assigned to it. But everything else we try to define by class. So this wall, if we want to control its graphic attributes at different scales and different types of viewports, either plan or section viewport, we can control it, per scale, per viewport, and it always defaults to what the attributes that are assigned to that class are. So each piece of that wall can take different attributes, and there's more graphic control for us on the way the documents end up looking. Similarly, doors. this is a door style. I can edit this style. And here I see, this is like, it's very similar to the door settings, except that it defines by style. So everything that has that little curvy arrow here is going to take its definitions from what it says here. So at this point in this project, we were concerned about the trim, because we wanted to have some exterior views that may be rendered. So we assigned a particular class to everything that says exterior on it here. But one of the powerful tools with the with door and window styles is that if I have it defined for one style in this file, the way I want it, I can then go and import class settings from any other style that already exists in this file. And again, this goes to graphic consistency. So it saves us time. We don't have to do it one by one for each door or for each door style. We define it once, and then we deploy it for all the doors in the project. And when that's assigned, then all we have to do is go to that class of the exterior trim or whatever and change its texture. And now instead of gray trim, we have white trim or whatever. And we can we make changes quickly. Same thing for things like thresholds. Sorry. If I go to the threshold and I have a number of different dimensions that are defined for the way the threshold works on this this door, I can import it from another style. And again, same threshold for every exterior door. Same goes to trim. Can import from here. So we use it more and more. That's what I find. If I cycle back to where we're talking about exporting DWG, if I want to export the DWG of this file and send to a consultant, I go to the export here and I get the export options. And here I have a number of export settings that I created for different consultants that we work with. So that, for example, we have a consultant, Energy Economics Inc. If I want to export to EEI, I know what version they're on. I know what they want to receive from us. I know that they're MEP and electrical, MEP and fire protection consultant, so they're not interested in other things. I can tailor the type of export to what they need, want, and expect. So at this point, I'd like to know if there are questions or anything that you'd like me to cover that I haven't.
Does anyone have questions for Benny on?
Yes, not.
think Bridget is trying, but we don't hear her.
Sorry?
Oh,
She's asking questions.
can
we're not hearing her.
everyone unmute yourself?
Brigitte, well, she put something in the chat.
Oh, that's right. I'll look for it.
No, that's odd. We can't hear her. Huh.
You're talking about me? No, I didn't put anything.
Bridget, you can hear us, of course, right?
Bridget asked that with the DWG, she usually sees single lines when they import DWGs. Is there any way to avoid this? She asked.
Single lines instead of what? Of walls?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that, so I don't know. But like I said, we don't do a whole lot of DWG import. A lot of the DWG import that we do is from survey engineers, and they don't really send buildings; they send sites. So I haven't seen this kind of loss of double lines to single lines. I don't know. How do I get to the chat? Because I don't see.
It's at the bottom in the middle of the screen.
It's to share your screen.
I have to share my screen?
No,
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 it's
I said right next to share your screen.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, DWGs are usually just line-based drawing. That you do have the ability to import 2D and 3D, but most of the stuff I see from consultants and stuff is just line work. So it does all come in as single lines. You can, use the command to, can't think of it, to combine, certain layers of from different layers, combine them into sort of a polyline if they're all touching. So you could, if you have like an exterior wall, you could select, it says select tangent, or I forget what it is, and so anything that's joined to it, you can sort of select them all at once and then make it into a polyline or something that then you could take that polyline and convert it to a wall or something if you're trying to.
That's during the import or after the import, Brian?
I'm sorry, Benny?
Is it after you've imported it?
Yeah, it's after you've imported it. Select to
so you have to go wall by wall, Brian?
There's this select connected objects under edit.
select, yeah, that's what I'm trying to think of. Select connected objects. So you sort of go through layer by layer and just turn on the A walls layer, and then you can say select connected objects, then under modify, convert to polygons or something. Or there's also the compose command under modify.
Yeah. Yeah.
But generally, yes, DWGs come in as just lines for the most part.
Does anyone use templates for other things, other uses than what I've covered?
No, that was a great history. There's another question here. If your classes aren't as developed and most of the engineers are using AutoCAD or Revit, how would you recommend to collaborate with them?
my instinct is always to do the straight import from AutoCAD or Revit and create its own file. In other words, I don't want to bring it into our working file. I'm concerned about all kinds of things, but size is one, and the proliferation of number of classes is another. So if I receive a DWG from an engineer and I'm able to import it and save it as a Vectorworks file, I'll reference it
Okay.
to the working file. And this may be what Vectorworks talk about when they talk about the shuttle files. Now, in theory, if the engineer doesn't move their drawing and they send an updated plan the next week, I can do the same thing and just swap the references and everything falls into place. But for that, I need to trust that the engineer didn't move things. I can check that, but I've seen a lot of times, especially with AutoCAD users, that they just move things in the world, and what was current last week now we just migrated a mile up the street, and that really grates on my sanity. I'm sorry. So, but we also don't do a whole lot of round tripping, and I don't know if any of you do a lot of collaboration and exchange and round tripping, and you have more experience with that. We try to actually minimize it.
One of the things I like about project sharing is that you can lock people out so that they can just view layers and some of those critical layers like the ground plan that cannot be moved by anybody without administrative rights.
Yeah. Again, there are different ways to skin a cat, but I would do that with references, so I can put the things that are not going to that are critical in a file that's really not accessible to others if they're not going to change. There's a question about when would it be productive to use IFC. I find IFC to be useful exchanging with Revit. Revit users I think we've had success going both ways with IFC, both from us to them and from them to us. And like I said, there's a little more stability and more predictability in how it works.
Yeah, IFC is sort of a universal file format that can be read by most software programs. And it's really just the building geometry, but it also has the information associated with that geometry, that it's a wall, that it's a door, that it's a window. And often if you click on it, if the proper data is attached to that, you can sort of, like Benny was saying, you can see what that information is telling you about that window, if it's a pillow window or whatnot, if that information attaches to it. But it's really just a 3D representation. We still have to send DWG backgrounds to our consultants for them to use as the underlay for their line work, for the sheets and stuff to print out. But we get their steel models and integrate it with ours. We get their ductwork, mechanical models, and can integrate it and begin to actually cut live sections through it and see where the trusses are and where the steel is, and where the ducts are, where we need to drop a ceiling or something to get around the duct work. Yeah, and I think like Benny was saying, it's a lot more reliable than Revit. I know they're making incremental steps and making Revit imports better. Revit's sort of a closed loop system that they've sort of had to reverse engineer and back crack the code to be able to work with the files. But you know, IFC is sort of a universal format that works with just about any BIM software, ArchiCAD or Revit or even in SketchUp. But you know, if you need to sort of coordinate a model in 3D, that's usually the best format to get from your engineer or give to your engineer. You can give them your base model for the architecture, and they can begin to populate it with their steel and ductwork and make sure everything's sort of coordinated at the proper Z heights, X, Y, and Z. So that's our universal format when we work with our consulting engineers. But still, we have DWGs that we give them. And always, give them a PDF. So if something's not clear on the DWG, they can see, what it's supposed to look like when it's printed out.
I think that, like you said, Brian, the IFC is very useful in exchanging the three-dimensional model information of the file of the project. The DWG is really for the flat two-dimensional drawings.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's sort of a file format that they can't manipulate. They can't start moving walls around on you or something in the design. You can't move their steel around, so you have to sort of go back and forth with them and get them to update their model. If you need to move something this way or that way, you can get in it and you can sort of move. Yeah, you can actually move it in your model and maybe send it back to them and say, we need to do this with this area and move things around. But next time you get the update from them, it's going to be back in the place that it originally was, unless they have updated it. So you can take the objects and sort of manipulate them, but it's not really supposed to be used that way. Sort of a temporary way to maybe get your model to look good for a rendering. That column sticking out of the wall, I need to move it back or whatever to make it look right for this rendering. I can manipulate it a little bit, but it's really just supposed to be, everybody takes care of their own trade and updates the model as changes are made.
Hey, Benny, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
All right. You were talking about importing like a survey as a reference file, setting up a reference file, which makes sense to me. We always have that issue. If we just import into our file, then you get all those other classes and it just makes a mess of things. So can you just explain how you do that? Because I have actually not used reference files. So.
Yeah. So right here, this was the file that I opened from the template. It's not really an empty file, but there's no building geometry in it. If I go to import, and I want to import a single DWG here. And it asks me here where to find it. I'm going to see if I have a survey of this same project that we're talking about. So okay, so here is a DWG that came from a survey engineer. I think this is, I think this is it. And I say open, and it reads it, And here are the DWG input options. So since there may be an element of trial and error here, because I assume that what the engineer sent me is in feet, because most survey engineers work in feet, but that's not always the case. Other than that, I don't change anything here, and I say, okay. And now it asks me to map colors to line weights. I'm not going to sweat that, because I honestly am not going to care about it. If I need to use their line work, I'll do it on an as needed basis. So I'll just accept the default, and then it asks me for font mapping. Here we try to work with Arial narrow everything, so I just map everything to it. And here's, it says that the import succeeded, and here's the what came from the engineer. So now what I do, I just I save it as, and I'm not gonna try not to do that in the project file. So I'll do it in a folder for this presentation here. I'm going to call it site test. So now I have a file called site test, and it sits in that in the folder for this presentation. I'm going to start a new blank file from the template, and here it opens up. I go to the to just any design layer, and I ask for the reference here, and I right click and I say new reference. Ask for new reference, and I go looking for, sorry, it's here. And here's a site test. So now Vectorworks tells me creating a reference to a Vectorworks file in this manner allows you to reference resources from that file via the resource manager. If you want to reference layer geometry from the Vectorworks file, use create viewport command to create the design layer viewport. And actually, that's really what I want to do. I'm sorry, I'm going to cancel here, and I'm going to do a design layer reference. Should have done that. So I behave, I'm on a design layer, Edric. So I behave like I'm creating a viewport, and I'm telling it to go to this design layer. So now a lot of the options of the viewport are grayed out, because when creating a design layer, I don't have the options that are available for sheet layer options. And it asks me what's the source. So I go to select source, and I'm going to an external document, and it's a new reference. So I go to choose, and here's the site test. And I'll just take the absolute path to it, mainly because the new file that I created, I actually haven't named it or saved it anywhere, so it doesn't really have a location. And I say okay, and now the survey shows up on my design layer right here in A side, but in the object info palette, it shows as a reference viewport.
Okay.
And here, just like any sheet layer viewport, I can control which layers are on or off. When I did the import in the other file, it all went to one layer called 222 Dale Street, because that's how the engineer named it. And there's nothing on any of the other ones, so I can actually turn this off. All of them except for that. That's still the case. And I can control the classes. So here, for example, I see all the classes that we have in our template. And I can start seeing here all kinds of classes that really don't fall into the into our format. So I see there's a P drain line, and I see lot labels text and lot labels and LGD text TM or whatever. And I know that these are the classes that came from the engineer, but they're all on. I can here select all of them from first to last and just ask them all to be in black. I think it will work. And now, now it will work. Now you see that the arrowheads that came from AutoCAD are off the scale, because Vectorworks has design layer scales. AutoCAD doesn't. So everything here is 48 times the size, because that's a scale that I had set it to by default. But this is just a reference. It's not so if this came from the engineer like this, but we've already drawn floor plans for the building and they don't agree on the orientation with the engineer. Let's say here's where he has his north. I can take this whole viewport and just rotate it so that north is pointing up and everything moved as one piece, and it did not affect the other file. So I think there's a layer of insulation between our work and the consultant's work by doing this reference. It also keeps the file size down, and it's a little more hygienic because you're not importing all those class names from another consultant.
Yeah. So we do project files a lot now since we're all working remotely. I assume if the reference file is in the same, would have to be on the same Dropbox or server that everybody's keeping the project, or where the project file is located, then it'll still update for whoever's working on the file.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in theory, this file doesn't change because we're not,
Right. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sure.
I believe if with project sharing, if you have the reference file, there's an option for an absolute or a relative location. So you can put that in a definitive location and not worry about the folders separate, the location separating from the working file or the project file.
Yeah.
One other thing, and if someone does change the referenced file, you will see an update on the design layer that it's out of date, and you right click and you update that. Or if you're opening a file it will tell you that there's out-of-date references if someone does change that reference file.
Yeah, there's an option for it. You can either ask it to alert you that it changed, or to just update it automatically if it sees that it changed. But I don't remember what it defaults to. But in the references here, in the object info palette, you can see that showing up as a reference. If someone changed that reference in that location, it will turn red here, and you would know that you need to update it.
And how do you update it?
You right click and you say update here, or
That's it.
Betty, when you brought that in by default, could you go to your class tab for a second? I was just curious how it brought in the classes from the AutoCAD.
here in this file where it's only referenced, it didn't bring them in.
Correct.
They don't exist here, but in that
The other,
file where I did the import into, it brought everything on top of everything we already had in the template. So if I now go to Tools and Purge, and I purge everything I can purge.
I'm definitely not an expert on the DWG import and export, but when we, in theater, in entertainment, when we bring that in, it's usually a one-time thing. We trace it and then we get rid of it and we don't really reference back to it. One of the things one feature I found of, and I really love, is that when you're in the advanced tab of the import DWG or DXF, there's one to put a class to say, put a prefix to everything coming in on the AutoCAD. You can put, I put AC, and then they all go into a subfolder where they don't pollute the rest of the drawing.
Yes, yes. I once did that, and I get the prefix. I wrote the prefix of a server engineer who we worked with, and every subsequent import from AutoCAD defaulted to that, because if you don't change it, they'll keep doing it. And then for a number of projects, I had a slew of classes starting with the word Chappelle, because that was the name of that engineering firm. So you have to be careful with that. But you're absolutely right. It works. It's useful. Again, the reason I like working with references is that I can insulate it in its own file, and I don't have to work in it. I don't need to adjust my brain to the way some other consultant thinks.
Yeah, it can't be manipulated or modified unless you go back into that file and start moving things around, so somebody can't accidentally grab the property line and drag it off for you.
In much smaller file sizes is the other big benefit.
Smaller files is an important benefit, yes.
So Benny, if you want to change the way it looks, like you mentioned the arrowheads, you go into the original file and change it there, and it will automatically update the referenced file.
I don't know, because I haven't done that, Shelley. I really don't like using their information because of the formatting issue. So, for example, they when they surveyed this property, they marked a number of trees, but their trees are flat trees. So they're useful to us just in establishing the location of the tree. But we'll go back and we can do one of two things: either just manually placing plants where they mark trees, and we'll do it on our design layer. So again, we don't cross-contaminate.
Mm-hmm.
Or, which I haven't tried, I can use the magic wand and select. Okay, it's not doing it. I can select all the symbols with a certain name, or everything on a certain class or whatever, and just replace those symbols with our symbols, with our tree symbols that are three-dimensional, that have more to do with what we see in the project than what the survey engineers saw in the project.
Mhm. So you basically make your own layer of information that you want in your drawing.
I do, with one possible exception. If I go and I pick a line that the survey engineer put on, and I see that they put it on a class called property, and I activate that class, and I ask to look only at that active class, and now I see that they have property lines. I can just I'll do select all just to make sure that I'm looking at everything, and I see only the 3 lines and all property line. Now that I have a reasonable level of certainty that I know what I'm looking at, I can move them to our design layer and our proper class name. So, and then I'll make sure that they show up here by class, all the attributes. And now we've essentially converted the engineer's information to our standards. But I'm very careful with that, because again, if I do that en masse, I run the risk of inheriting the mess that they created, and they do create mess.
But you can take a reference drawing and select certain things like the property lines and bring them over and classify them how you choose.
Yes, or in this
You
case,
have to go back to the original drawing.
You do.
the,
Okay. So you can't take it from the reference drawing.
not directly from the reference, but if I'm here in the file that it's been referenced into, and I look at the reference tab here, I can right click and open it. Right now, the file is already open, so it just will switch to that file. But if the file is not open, it will open it from here. And again, if you haven't moved it, you can do copy and paste in place, and it'll fall right into place. Again, provided that the design layer scales are the same.
Does anyone have any more questions? Well, Benny, this has been very helpful. What a wonderful presentation, very organized.
Very nice, Benny. That was great.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
it's terrific. And next month, Jim, you're up for next month?
I'll take
Is
your
that-
word for it.
What?
I'll take your word for it.
I think that's what we had planned, March. You volunteered for March.
I'm always there.
That's great.
Um,
Great, great.
A couple of, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, nothing. We'll work out what exactly what you'd like to do. We can do that offline unless anyone.
Well, whatever everybody wants.
Yep. Well,
I
I,
have a couple of things that I put in my template files that I just wanted to mention, but if Shelley, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no. Go ahead. We have plenty of time here.
A couple of things that I like to put in my template files is I like to include saved views, a group of saved views. I also like to keep a group of data tags as I'm using more and more data tags, data visualizations as well. And I've been using a lot of hyperlinks lately, whether it's moving around in a drawing or going to an external file or a menu. If you have a reference to, in this instance, to a certain tree, and you make reference to it and on a website, or a door, a window manufacturer with the model number, just including a hyperlink right next to that. put a lot of those into the drawings now. I use them more for save views and going in between layers and different files, or going to a movie. If I've done an example of doing something within Vectorworks, but I'm using hyperlinks like crazy now. They save so much time of not having to go because it's right in the drawings. If you know you want to go right from one location in a saved view or to another layer, not having to go over to the navigation palette to go check a save view or go somewhere else where it's right where you zoomed in already, I found has saved a lot of time.
Wow.
Those were just a couple of things that I put in my template files as well.
And also talking about the hyperlinks with the new 21 version, section and detail markers when you export as a PDF are hyperlinks. So if you click on you have your detail on your plan, you click on that marker, it'll take you to that blow up in your set.
Correct, exactly.
Or
Wow.
your section marker, it'll take you to that spot
Love
PDF set. So that's a
And a little trick, when you put hyperlinks into a drawing, normally you have to tell a Macintosh user to hold Command and double click, or I think it's Control for the Windows side. So there's a modify, you can't change that. And I like to just double click on something. I don't want to have to use a modifier key. And then you also have to explain to people on cross platforms, okay, what's the modifier key? Well, it's not Command for them. It gets a little confusing sometimes. There's a little unknown secret that if you make a worksheet out of your hyperlinks, there will be a column that says activate on double click or false, true or false. You can only change it there. But if you would like to change it there and you'd like to have your hyperlinks so you don't have to use a modifier key to double click and activate them, you just want somebody to be able to double click them, that's a way to around that. And it's so easy to edit. If you have a ton of hyperlinks in a drawing, it's so much easier to enter them and to enter the web link or the save view or whatever the information, because you can copy and paste into them. It's so much easier to do it from a worksheet rather than having to search the whole drawing to find each of the hyperlinks. So if you do use hyperlinks, it's a great way to manage them is just make a worksheet out of them.
Yeah, I think worksheets are a pretty powerful tool, more than just putting schedules together. There's a lot of back end worksheets you can sort of use to rename viewports without having to go double click on each viewport and go in the annotations and rename it and all that stuff. So there's some housekeeping worksheets that are.
And now that we can send it out to Excel for prettying up, even better. That was one of my favorite things of 2021. It was kind of in the back. Nobody really made a big deal out of it. I think I'm using export to Excel more than any of the other new features. The smart options display, okay, that is number one. That's definitely number one. But doing the export to Excel, I've been finding I'm doing a lot more. And I think the one thing that we're missing in our worksheets that I'm not sure if it's proprietary or not to Excel is we don't have a way to do a fill series for a sequence of numbers. So that's the one thing that I really like Excel more for than anything else. And there's so many better format tools in Excel that I find it much less time to just send it out to Excel, do what I need and bring it back in than it is to try to format within the worksheet itself.
Yeah, because now the formatting goes through. It's not just a mess. When you used to export, it's a mess. You have to reformat it on both ends. It was always, if you have bold or highlighted stuff, it all translates pretty well.
It is one thing that I didn't cover and I just thought about it, and I'll see if it's opening up now. Is what do you do when the template has evolved to a point, but you have a project that started a couple of years ago and it doesn't have all the new upgrades that you've introduced into the template. For example, the drawing label styles that we did, and I started doing it one by one, and it was pretty. It wasn't very enjoyable. And then I called tech support, Vectorworks tech support, and I asked them, and they told me how to do that. Wasn't very obvious to me, but once I found it, was pretty powerful way of doing it. And right now I'm opening a fairly large file from an older project that kind of stopped about a year ago. So I'm going to see how long it's going to take it to open, because it's actually upgrading it to 2021. But there's a way with forget what the tool is called. It's gonna take another minute, but let's see. It's custom modification tool, and are you familiar with that? Anyone?
The custom modification?
Custom modification.
Yeah, it's us.
So just bear with me. Okay, I think it's finally up, and
You need to reshare your screen.
okay, yeah. So here's an older project that we, it stopped about a year ago, and you see our drawing label is the old drawing label. It's not the way the template has them now. And here is a file that was opened from the template, and it has, if I go to the resource manager and I go to the oh yeah, I purged this file, that's why. It's going to be maybe here, and maybe not. Hold on, I'm going to start a new file from the template. I don't know why I'm not seeing them. This is a little annoying. But anyway, if I back to this old file, and oh, I know why. I'm sorry. But if you go to tools and custom modification, and you say type is drawing label right here, and you click look also in viewport annotations, it already tells me there's 247 of them in this file. And if I say okay to this, and I wait a minute, I can change it from the unstyled, because at the time there weren't even styles for it, and I can replace the style to this new style that we have in our template. So if I double click and I say okay and okay, and now it changed the style it's just the typeface. But now this entire file in one operation change all the drawing labels to this new style. You can do the same thing for detail callouts. You can do the same thing for not really the grid lines, because the grid lines were completely rebuilt in 2021. So they have nothing to do with the old grid bubbles. But then with grid lines, there's relatively few of them in a project. So if you need to rebuild a grid, you just rebuild a grid, and it's there.
I believe a good practice on that is that if you, rather than just do the custom modification and select it and do the modification, if you save that as a script, and if you have to do that to multiple files, you can save that as a script, keep the script in the template file as well, so that script will be available every time you open a new file.
Can you do that as part of your March presentation? Because scripts are something that I'd really like to get into, and I haven't.
It's actually something you can if you just want to do that process again for a second, it's just one more click.
The checkbox there, yeah.
So when you do either, whether it be the selection or the modification, after you select what you had, and there you go. And also when you, yeah, there you go.
And then it's how to execute immediately. It's just
Correct. Create the script,
Okay.
and then just hit OK. And that's going to say, do you want a new palette of scripts? And you would just make conversion. So you can make a new palette. You don't want it to put it in your save views, so make a new palette. And you can just make that custom modification scripts or whatever you'd like to call it.
Okay. Whatever. I'll just give it a name. I know what it is.
Hit OK. And then you'll put it into that one. Yep. And that one would be title block, was it? Or excuse me,
Drawing.
drawing label.
Drawing label.
There you go.
Okay. Good. Okay, that's fine.
Drawing label update, or yeah, there you go.
Title script. Okay.
And then if you go to your window menu in palettes, you'll see one, where is it? There should be one for scripts. Oh, well, script palettes, there it is. So if you go into, in the current file, you'll go down, you'll see script palettes. If you go down about halfway down that first, yep, keep going. Oh, you just went by it, about halfway.
This, current file.
Current file, there you go. So you have custom one. And there's a way to get that, and you'll see that palette was open on the top left, but it just went away. So if you do that once again. There you go. And see in the top, you have custom 101.
Yep.
You have a palette there. Yep. You can dock that or you can let it float. And then you can run that script. So if you save that to your template file, you'll have those scripts available to anything that you're opening.
That's cool.
And it's also in the resource manager as well, isn't it?
I do, yeah, you can import it or export it. I like doing that just for selection. So if I'm trying to find a certain type of lighting fixture, I just set up a script for each of the type of lighting fixtures I use, and I don't have to go through the drawing and try it and use that. I don't have to set that script up in the criteria each time.
Okay, that's cool. And what's the script shows here? It's right here, right?
Correct. That's the save views. Is that your current file?
This is the current file. Okay.
So you can just right click on that and export.
I want to understand how it's built inside.
Oh, yes.
So, okay.
I'm not a code kind of person, so that's the only way I can write script.
Okay, no, then that's fine. I'm not a code person too, but I think if I see a dozen of these scripts, I'll start understanding, you know.
Yeah, there is, I think, a guide to the syntax for it.
Okay. That's pretty cool. I learned something new. Thanks, Jim.
Not as much as I learned tonight. I usually don't see a lot, I don't get to float around with the architects a whole lot. I learned a lot from them. I'd like to start using stories more. I'd like to find more uses for that. One thing I saw, Benny, when you brought that up, the stories, you had something that was set up, a graphic that had a person on the top floor on the roof level. Did you make that?
No, that's straight out of the box.
I poked around to see if I could find that. I've never seen that before. That was a very good graphic to help people understand the stories. I didn't have that on the right-hand side looking like that. I didn't go too deep into it.
It may have to do with the way the stories are
Set up.
defined here in the
Yeah.
either in the level types or default story levels. Do you know, Brian?
About what the default story.
How to get that little guy there?
I think it's just the graphic. If you switch to like the first floor, that little guy standing on the first floor.
Yeah, I never saw that though. Just that whole dialogue. The mannequin's cool, but I never saw that layout. But then again, we don't use stories a whole lot because most of our, layers does what we needed to do to break it up.
Yeah.
But that's a really interesting use, especially if you were doing like a 2-story exhibit or a 3-story exhibit or something, a museum where there's different levels of the event.
Yeah, and that elevation benchmark, dot there sort of changes if you had a ceiling at 10 feet or whatever, it'd be above the guy's head. So
Do you use that, Brian? The ceiling layer for stories?
I kind of go back and forth. I kind of don't use it more because if there's a variation between, a 7'6" ceiling and a 9-foot ceiling, and you set your ceilings at 9 feet, and you have to remember that the ceilings at the 7'6" is minus, 1'6". So we sort of started moving away from having it. The layer may have a layer, but set it at the same as the floor level, and always make sure that that ceiling slab is at the right Z height according to that story. Because it's great if all your ceilings are 9'6", then you're all set. We'll put our ceiling on layer it's 9'6", but we run into so many variations where it's one room maybe 8 feet, another you might have to drop it down to 7'6". So you sort of have to remember what the datum is, then how far to offset that. If it's 12 feet, then it's plus 2 feet. It's just so. Since we go through so many variables, it's ceiling heights. A lot of times we just at that ceiling height at the same floor level, slab level, then make sure each of those ceilings have the proper Z height set to them. The thing I keep trying to get is to have the data tag actually tell you what the ceiling height is, so you can record that Z height of it.
That should be possible. No?
It should be.
It should be just from the
Like Z height. Well, it's giving it to us in inches or some kind of units, and even when we said to divide by 12 and format it to feet and inches, it still wasn't giving us.
Yeah, you should be able to do that.
Record.
Definitely you can definitely represent it in the data tag from the object function.
Yeah.
We'll give you the elevation from the Z elevation, but the conversion, it should be able to come in with the document units.
Yeah, I need to dig into it again. It's something I struggled with, and so I can't waste my time doing this anymore.
Is that maybe a partial topic for next month, is data tags and data visualization? Has somebody already done that one?
No,
No,
we have not. That's a good feature. I love data visualization. I'm really getting into that.
I was data deprived for a long time because I just did conceptual artwork. And so data wasn't a big part of my workflow, and control, bidding costs and all that. And now it's all about data to me. I really turned 360 degrees in the last 4 years of my drawings were nothing to do about data management. And now it's all about that. I barely even use worksheets. It's like, you guys figure out how many pieces you need. It's just a pretty picture. You do with it with what you want. But there's, so many different uses of Vectorworks and how different people, have so many different ways of using it. Because to me, it was all pretty picture, and I didn't, I wasn't looking at, a lot of the record keeping and a lot of the worksheet functionality. And now I find it's so much easier to manipulate the drawing through data than it is with the mouse. It's so much easier. But if that's a good topic, we definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Data visualization, data tags, and what else good? Has anybody done anything on worksheets?
It's been a while, but it's always a good subject.
it's always good.
I'm not, worksheets. Maybe I can get Frank to join me a little bit because he's doing a whole lot of stuff on worksheets lately, and he's got a whole lot of tips and tricks. So maybe I can drag him along and throw a little bit out. We
That'd be great.
had Luis Ruiz do a 3D subdivision modeling seminar this morning between our team. My head is just spinning with technology today. I'm on a roll.
Yeah, Luis does a great job.
Just amazing what he's doing. And Rob Hollis, I'm not sure if anybody has had the pleasure of working with Rob yet. Rob, he's only been around for about 1.5 years, 2 years. I've never seen anybody. He was talented when he joined, but I've never seen anybody latch on to what Luis is doing. He has a lot of day-to-day, interaction. So he's just learning everything Luis has to offer. And between the two of them, they are wild tutorials and example drawings. So Vectorworks University, there's so many new files. If anybody has not seen, everybody spend a lot of time on Vectorworks University? If anybody has not gone there, I love it. I can't sleep at night. I end up 3 in the morning. It's like, I gotta go to bed. I've had enough of this. But it's funny is the university, and I tell this to everybody, I myself personally cost myself decades of time because I thought I was a software guru when I joined with MiniCAD, and I just went in right into doing drawings, and I never looked at chapter 1 or 2. I said, oh no, I knew McDraw, I think it was at the time. I know software. Why should I possibly go and read the manual, right? And now, almost like clockwork, about every 6 months, I go to the basics and I watch Don Ward's beginner's class. And there's never a time I don't take that or look at that university course and don't find something that saves me an hour a day. It's amazing at the little things that we sometimes don't see in chapter 1 or 2 because we jump right to chapter 3. And I can't get enough of the basic course right now. I just review it over and over and over, and there's always something I missed. It's an amazing, and plus just, watching Dawn's method of teaching is just awesome. But for anybody that hasn't seen that, what is over on Vectorworks University, there's a lot of example files over there. So
yeah, you guys have really filled that fight out in the last year.
yeah, that's all Juan's team. They're going up.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Benny. That was
Thank
good.
you,
Yeah,
Benny.
thanks.
Benny, it was great. We
Yeah, thank
so
you, Benny,
appreciate
for
that.
doing the heavy
Yeah.
lifting for me this week for the group.
Yeah.
Very
And
good. Nice to see everybody. That's
Yeah,
another-
likewise.
always nice to see everyone.
Yeah,
And we'll see each other in a month.
Okay,
all right.
great.
You guys want to just reach out, a week or two, and we'll make sure everything, all the ducks are all lined up nice in a row.
I'm gonna follow up with an email, Jim, and so far we have data visualization, data tags, and worksheets, and we'll need a fourth. But we'll worry about that. We'll,
What is everybody else interested in? What else can we think of?
I'll have to think about it.
Very nice background, Brian.
Yeah.
very nice.
I'm open, so whatever everybody would like.
Project.
If I don't know it, I'll learn it before I need to do it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again, Benny. That was great.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Thanks,
Ben.
that was awesome.
Great
All
seeing
right.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.